Yeah.
This is Geek Therapy Radio.
What are we waiting for?
And now your mental curator, Johnny Hamburger.
Welcome to Geek Therapy Radio. It is the first weekend after Thanksgiving, and I don't know the definition of best ofs or making a best of radio show. Most other people are out of town and they're putting on a best of whatever their show is. That's not how I roll here at Geek Therapy Radio. By the way, I'm Johnny Hamburger. I am your mental curator, and as I've just discussed, this is a brand new Geek Therapy Radio. It's going to be an awesome show. In the meantime, before we get started, make sure you're all subscribed and liked and following all the Geek Therapy Radio social media. If you don't know exactly which one it is, just type in Geek Therapy Radio with Johnny Hamburger into Google, and it will all come up. So if you're subscribing to the podcast with the iHeartRadio app, or Spreaker, or Google Podcasts, or whatever you're using to listen to podcasts, if it's not in one podcast app, just try another, but make sure you search for Geek Therapy Radio with Johnny Hamburger. There's another Geek Therapy network that I am not affiliated with, so make sure it's Geek Therapy Radio with Johnny Hamburger. Let's move on. This is a very interesting first topic I wanted to address. Airplane noises, all those funny noises you hear on the airplane. Well, I'm here to ease your fears and give you a little bit of education here so that you can be well informed and at ease on your next flight, especially as we travel around during the holidays. I guarantee you most of you have experienced this, especially if you have done any air travel recently. You hear a strange noise as your plane leaves the gate before departure, and then again shortly after landing before pulling up to the arrival gate. A strange sawing or barking sound originating beneath your feet. Inevitably, while you're worrying about the unsettling experience of your airplane making strange noises, of course, somebody within earshot, usually a child, but not always, wonders out loud, what is that noise? Well, I'm here to tell you so that you can be that smarty pants on your next flight. I'd even go so far as to say this information will make you a hero to those already apprehensive about flying, and right off the bat, I'll say you have absolutely nothing to worry about. That sawing noise, that barking noise, whatever it is, that noise is normal, and going further will now become comforting. When you hear it, you'll know for sure that all is well. That sawing noise, barking noise, whatever, mostly pertains to Airbus aircraft, specifically the A320 family, but I can confirm it also occurs on the A319 since I was most recently on an A319 going to and from Sarah's family in Virginia from Houston. That sawing or barking sound you hear is from a hydraulic component called the PTU, or Power Transfer Unit. It powers hydraulic systems like flaps, landing gear, doors, or any manner of things requiring hydraulic force. If you're wondering what hydraulics are, it's what moves the giant bucket of a bulldozer or backhoe. It's a bunch of hoses that force oil under pressure to actuate and move various articulating things. On an airplane, again, that would be stuff like flaps, the rudder, landing gear, etc. You only usually hear the PTU making noise during taxi to and from the gate. When an Airbus A320 is moving around on the ground, usually only one of the engines is running to conserve fuel. When one of the engines is off, the PTU picks up the slack in powering some hydraulic systems. When in flight, obviously, both engines are running and directly powering the necessary hydraulic systems like the flaps, rudder, and landing gear, etc. Speaking of landing gear, that solid clunk you hear and feel in your feet is the landing gear thunking up into the bay after takeoff and then thunking back down a minute or so before landing. It is completely normal, and again, hearing those thunks after takeoff and before landing is comforting. It means the landing gear is working normally, and that's kind of important. Finally, on the subject of normal aircraft operation, let me ease some of your fears as I think of them off the top of my head. First, those little barbs coming off the wing are to help with static electricity discharge and also serve to divert lightning around the plane. As an airplane flies, it can build up static electricity, just like rubbing your feet across the carpet. Those little barbs discharge the static electricity sparks into the air. Also, airplanes are designed to be struck by lightning. You have nothing to worry about. In fact, if the plane gets struck by lightning, you'll probably never notice. You've probably been on a plane when it gets struck. The bolt of lightning goes around the outside of the plane harmlessly on its way to the ground. Just about the worst you'll encounter, possibly, are the cabin lights flickering or your entertainment screen spazzing out for a second. One more thing to ease your mind. No commercial airliner has ever been brought down by turbulence during regular level flight. There have been freak downbursts during takeoff and landing that have crashed planes, but those have been almost insignificantly rare. What I'm talking about is the turbulence experienced at cruising altitude. But even at a few thousand feet above the ground, it's not serious. If you've been on a plane that violently drops in elevation or bounces around so hard you lose your lunch and plead with Jesus, I know it's scary, but you're gonna be absolutely fine. The plane is structurally designed to handle more violence than you can dream of. In other words, imagine the worst turbulence you've ever encountered. Multiply it by 100, and still the plane wouldn't even begin to bat an eye. You'll be horrified, but you'll be perfectly safe other than possibly bumps and bruises if you're not wearing your seatbelt. So buckle up. So again, you'll be uncomfortable, but you'll be 100% safe to complain about it to your friends and family. So I hope I've eased your minds about those funny noises planes make and the fact that turbulence won't kill you. 60 seconds on the way out for Audi Central Houston because, I don't know if you've noticed, but it's the holidays, and you've got to spend your money somewhere, so you might as well spend it at Audi Central Houston. Either for a gift for yourself or for a loved one, but let's be honest, it's probably gonna be for yourself, but it could be for a loved one. There's an Audi for every budget. The A3, either brand new or certified used, you can save some bucks there, or the Audi R8, which you can still get an R8 used, and you can justify it to yourself. I'll spend the money on R8. It's used. I saved money on this thing. If you buy an R8 of any year, of any vintage, let me know because I would like to drive it. Audi Central Houston and AudiCentralHouston.com. That's where you get started on your search for a new Audi. Talk to my friend Danny Posey. He's the GM there at Audi Central Houston. They'll take really great care of you and treat you like family. Audi Central Houston and AudiCentralHouston.com. Let's just listen to this for a second as it fades out. I love this bump music. This song right here, it's called Good Vibes. It is my favorite bump music, and I think I want it to be the overall melodic theme of Geek Therapy Radio. Because, like, different companies have different theme songs, different melodic progressions that help you remember and know exactly what the company is without ever hearing the words. So McDonald's, da-da-da-da-da, that's McDonald's. I want this music playing that just played, this bumper music just played, to be the sonic signature of Geek Therapy Radio. You would think it would be the intro music, but no, I just like this bump music so much. Let's get back on track. Welcome back to Geek Therapy Radio. I'm your mental curator, Johnny Hemberger, and I have some more fascinating things to talk about. Star Trek technology yet again becomes reality. Electroaerodynamics. When I first read the headline of a heavier-than-air machine using an ion drive for thrust, I thought it was purely theoretical, but it turns out a team at MIT have successfully flown an aircraft with solid-state propulsion. More specifically, a heavier-than-air craft propelled by ion drive. Their 5-pound, 16-foot wingspan prototype flies without propellers, turbines, fans, jets, rockets, or bottle rockets strapped to the wings, or otherwise. Instead, it uses ionized air to create silent, albeit a tiny amount of thrust. The phenomenon of ionic thrust has actually been observed since the 1920s, but until now has never seen application in an earthbound plane. I know you've heard about ionic thrusters being developed for spacecraft, but we haven't seen any on an earthbound plane. Thanks to the work of Major Alexander D. Seversky, among others, the principle has been further studied by those fascinated by aeronautics and other hobbyists. I know this can all sound confusing, but really it's pretty simple, as of course I'll explain. Matter of fact, I'd wager most of you have utilized ionic thrust in your own home for years. You know those ionic air purifiers? It's exactly the same principle being applied. A grid of wire, foil, is used. One element is positively charged, while the other adjacent element is negatively charged. Air surrounding the positive wire is stripped of electrons and therefore becomes attracted to the negative wire. As the stripped air molecules race to the other wire, that movement of air creates thrust. If you have one of those little things plugged into a bathroom outlet, put your face right up to it, like put your nose on it. Despite having no fans and no noise, you can still feel a tiny, and I do mean tiny, bit of air being pushed out. Now back to the team at MIT and their working prototype. This would not have become reality without Associate Professor of Aeronautics Stephen Barrett. Other than the working prototype itself, the coolest part of this story is that Stephen drew inspiration for the project after being inspired by the shuttlecraft in Star Trek. I'm not making this up. Over the next 9 years, he worked on a solid-state ion propulsion system using no moving parts. Holy crap, I love Star Trek. That's amazing. A direct example of science fiction becoming non-fiction. Now, of course, next on the docket, the Star Trek docket, would be teleportation, but back to MIT's aircraft. As of now, it's functional, if not understandably a bit crude. Let me say that again. As of now, it's functional, if not understandably a bit crude, utilizing fore and aft electrodes beneath the wings to pull air along underneath and create thrust. The fuselage contains lithium polymer batteries and various circuitry and transformers to send the required 40,000 volts to the electrodes. It goes without saying that this is 40,000 volts at a very low current. At the end of the day, MIT has created an ion drive prototype airplane that has flown under its own power, indoors of course, for 197 feet, and to purposefully draw parallels to the Wright Flyer at Kitty Hawk in December of 1903, this is the dawn of a new frontier in solid-state powered flight. In the relatively near future, we could see applications in solar-powered drone flight, at least to create assisted lift to conventional electric propeller propulsion. But in regards to whisking the public silently to their holiday destinations, who knows? For ion drive propulsion, the sky is the limit. Okay, to be clear here, it's not like you're going to be whisked up into the sky for your next flight to see the in-laws on an aircraft powered by completely silent ionic thrusters. That's not realistic. There are still massive leaps and bounds to be made in making the system efficient and making it, for one thing, provide enough thrust. What do jet engines put out? Tens of thousands of pounds of thrust. Like the average 737 or Airbus A320, like we just talked about in the segment before, in the first segment. Those things put out, off the top of my head, 17,000 pounds of thrust, maybe more than that per engine. Multiply that engine time, well, it's more than that. The 747s have 4 massive engines. So do Airbus A380s. Just huge. They can push cars over. I mean, they can strip the paint off cars pretty much. Needless to say, the state of the art ion thrusters, ion propulsion systems for airplanes is infinitesimal compared to any sort of standard propulsion currently. Like even a prop airplane, a standard Cessna 150 prop airplane, I don't know how many pounds of thrust that puts out, but it's enough to move 1,200 pounds or so of weight through the air up to 10,000 feet or so. But ion thrusters, solid state ion thrusters, yeah, of course, nowhere near that amount currently. But you know what? Like I mentioned towards the end there, it doesn't have to get or be 100% there yet to replace, let's say, a jet engine or a turboprop or a regular prop or a rocket. It doesn't have to be there yet. If we can get it even a fraction of the amount there, you can use that thrust to offset the thrust created by burning conventional fossil fuels. So let's say even 1%, which even talking about this seems like a hell of a lot. But let's say you can get an ionic thruster on an airplane to produce 1% of the total overall thrust. You might think that's not a lot. That's not enough of an offset. Multiply that 1% times however many millions of flights per year. That adds up quickly. In conjunction with using renewable fuels in aircraft, that is a significant reduction in reliance on fossil fuels. Now, I love cars. You know me. I've preached about that I'm not a greenie weenie, but, I'm all about efficiency. If we can use the fuels that we have right now efficiently, I'm all for that. Whatever gets that V8 thumping. As long as we can make it efficiently and it's used the most efficient way, that is totally cool with me. I'm going to do 30 seconds here on the way out for Audi Central Houston. Make sure you subscribed to Geek Therapy Radio across all social media. Audi Central Houston and AudiCentralHouston.com. It's the holidays coming up here, so make sure you're heading to Audi Central Houston and starting at AudiCentralHouston.com to find an Audi, used or new, in any budget. The A3 has most of the technology available in the R8. Both machines are works of art. Speaking of fuel efficiency, the Audi e-tron burns zero fuel. All the new models are available at Audi Central Houston and AudiCentralHouston.com. Awesome drinks, amazing food, arcade games, and karaoke. Where else does a geek need to go to have some fun? They go to Kung Fu Saloon at 5317 Washington Avenue. The best drinks, the most mind-boggling food, and a great selection of arcade games, and you can even get your tay-tay on with some karaoke. That's Kung Fu Saloon, 5317 Washington Avenue, kungfusaloon.com, and tell them Geek Therapy Radio sent you. Welcome back to Geek Therapy Radio. Okay, I know I just did a piece recently exploring the slowing down of Moore's Law, or Moore's Trend, which is my argument. But if you're anything like me, you still want to know if late 2018, early 2019 is a good time to build a PC. Whether it's your state-of-the-art, best of the best dream rig, or simply a basic Skype rig for your grandma. I can already tell you, if you just want to get granny connected, just get a cheap tablet. But in keeping in context of this segment, let's stay focused on building a PC. I'll give some examples and recommendations here, but overall, it's imperative to know that this is merely a segment to provide guidance, not an end-all be-all on what you, the individual consumer, should absolutely buy. Every single one of us has different needs, and even more broadly, you may have different price deals around your specific location. On that note, right off the bat, let's talk about system RAM, because as of recording this segment, the RAM market isn't great, honestly. So let's start by discussing how much is required for your purposes, since there is no use in blowing your budget on 32 plus gigs of RAM if all you need is word processing, sending emails, and browsing YouTube and social media. So let's start with RAM. As of late 2018, RAM can be more expensive than usual. Production, demand, and market all come into play here, and the end result is that it can be a considerable expenditure in your new build. Currently, 4 gigabytes of DDR4 RAM is going for roughly around $30 per stick, according to Micro Center in my area, which is Houston. I think it's important here to clarify that we're only going to be dealing with current DDR4 RAM, not previous generation DDR3, which can be cheaper, but the focus here is the current generation PC builds. If you want to save considerable money and build a PC from previous generation architecture and hardware, that is certainly viable, and in certain cases, I'd have no issue recommending that path. That can be insane bang for the buck, but again, let's stick to the argument of building a PC with the current state-of-the-art, which is DDR4. So we've established that at the time of recording, RAM is about $30 for 4 gigabytes of DDR4. That's the information at hand. Let's explore how much you need. I'll keep it as simple as possible. If you need a basic emailer, Netflix watcher, word processor, Facebook crawling, non-gaming PC, you'll be safe with 4 gigabytes of RAM. After all, you can easily upgrade RAM later, as it inevitably becomes cheaper again and, thus the cycle continues. If you want all of the above functionality, but want to add light photo, video editing, and some gaming, 8 gigabytes is a great starting point. If you include gaming, you'll definitely want to devote some budget to a dedicated graphics card. A graphics card will be required for any reasonable gaming and will help photo and video editing as well. But it is not exclusively required for that photo and video editing. We'll go over video cards in a moment. Moving on to 16 gigabytes of RAM. 16 gigabytes of RAM is recommended if you're starting to get serious about content creation and using your PC for any serious grunt work. Matter of fact, this will help in considering building a serious gaming PC as well, since more and more titles chew through RAM liberally, often making 8 gigabytes insufficient in the more demanding AAA titles. Basically, the more RAM you have, the more you can do at once. More internet browser tabs, more plugins for audio, photo, and video editing, and more headroom to have background processes running while you're gaming. For instance, streaming your gameplay to Twitch or YouTube, etc. Now, I'd recommend 32 gigabytes and up if you're a serious, professional content creator. If your PC puts food on your table and pays your rent, don't even think about anything under 16 gigabytes. 32 gigabytes is where to start for a power user. As of recording, 32 gigabytes of DDR4 can be had for around $270 for two 16 gigabyte sticks. Okay, at this point, it's good to bring up a few things to consider. 1. RAM is upgradable, an important note to consider when budgeting other system components. For instance, if your end game is a monster editing workstation or gaming beast, maybe start with 16 gigabytes of RAM and put the difference into a baller graphics card and upgrade the RAM later. In other words, don't get 32 gigabytes of RAM and a basic $70 NVIDIA GT 1030 graphics card for just okay gaming and video editing. Instead, get 16 gigabytes of RAM for about $110 or thereabouts and add the $160 saved in RAM towards a vastly superior GTX 1050 Ti or RX 570 from Team Red for around $205, respectively. On the subject of graphics cards, make your ballpark considerations along with the RAM tiers we just talked about. So, for that basic email and Netflix PC at 4 gigabytes of RAM, I'd say don't bother with a graphics card. The graphics built into the CPU are more than enough to browse Facebook and binge The Office on Netflix for the 1000th time. And before the peanut gallery erupts, remember, you always have an upgrade path. You can easily upgrade your system as your needs, desires, and funds allow. When you want to upgrade your basic PC build for more gaming and editing, just slap another 4 gigabytes of RAM in there and the GT 1030 like we just discussed. Now you're at 8 gigabytes of RAM and have a decently paired GPU for light gaming and even light content creation. It's all about the upgrade path. Now, this following recommendation is just personal, but I think it's a good starting point, again, depending on your purpose for the build. For a basic all-rounder PC for decent gaming and basic content creation, that 8 gigabyte pairs nicely to a GT 1030, or even better, to a 1050 or 1050 Ti, or RX 560 if you can swing it. In other words, An RTX 2080 Ti paired with 8GB of RAM is a bit lopsided when that 8GB of RAM will bottleneck certain advantages the RTX 2080 Ti can otherwise afford you. Now for 16GB of RAM, I'd start with a 1050 Ti minimum, and even better, a GTX 1060. Remember, this is just my personal recommendation. This isn't gospel. My mindset being that at 16GB of RAM, you're starting to get serious about eliminating bottlenecks. At 16GB, the sky is the limit with graphics cards. At 16GB of RAM, any graphics card can run full bore if allowed by the last major component, the brains of the computer, the CPU. CPU recommendations can go either way, but for the most basic of basic, I'd recommend the cheapest AMD processor available supporting DDR4, like the Athlon 200GE. If you can find it, it'll set you back about 60 well-spent US dollars. On the blue side, a Pentium G4560 is about $30 more at $90. Again, none of this is firm by-the-book recommendation, and prices can vary. Once you're at the 8GB RAM tier, I'd start looking into the AMD Ryzen series or Intel Core series of CPUs. 8GB paired to the quad-core Ryzen 2200G would be a great pair, as would the quad-core Intel i3 8100. Something to point out for your considerations. Intel CPUs tend to be a bit more expensive, but have better single-core performance than AMD, and thus do better in gaming tasks. If you game less and render out photo and video projects more, then core count is king. In that regard, your dollar goes much farther with AMD. And on that note, that leads us into the baller tier PC builds. Once you get to 16GB of RAM and above, go for that core count, baby. If you can swing the cheddar, grab as many Intel cores as possible. If you game less than you create content, again, go for AMD. The same money will get more cores, which means faster project exports. Another quick note, when I say Intel performs better at gaming, AMD is at least 90% as good in games. For tons of people, that roughly 10% less frame rates per second with AMD is well worth the money saved and extra core count. There is absolutely nothing wrong gaming on AMD. For most people, once you're above 60 frames per second, it doesn't matter anyway. 130 FPS versus 120 FPS, inconsequential unless you're a competitive gamer. And if so, you'd be using Intel anyways. Do you see what I'm saying here? For gaming, AMD is 90% as good as Intel. So for the vast majority of people, that won't matter in gaming. Vast majority. Moving on to budget, I struggle to even bring up specific budget numbers here because component costs can vary day to day, and whatever I say here might not be 100% applicable even a week from now. But I will start somewhere. Across the board, I will assume most people already have peripherals like monitors, keyboards, and mice, so I won't account for that. For the basic 4GB build mentioned above, you're all in for around $300, including a case, a standard hard drive, and Windows. Even less if you already have any of these already. Like if you already have a Windows license, or you already have a hard drive, or you already have a case. Just subtract that from the cost. With 8GB in that GT 1030 graphics card, for basic editing and gaming, about $400 will get you there, give or take. Again, getting serious with 16GB and a beefy GTX 1050 Ti for more serious gaming and content creation, around $700 gets you a more than respectable gaming/workstation. Okay, to go full beast mode, at 32GB of RAM, current generation graphics card, baller CPU, and a mix of solid state and optical storage, honestly plan on spending some cash, mainly because new graphics cards are still very expensive currently. The cheapest RTX graphics card is the RTX 2070 at $500 just by itself. So, ballparking a $300 CPU, 32GB of RAM for another $270, then a motherboard, case, Windows, etc., plan on at least $1,300 conservatively. Guys and gals, again, I can't stress enough how much wiggle room there is in all of this. If you're watching this on YouTube, the comment section will be awash in speculation, recommendations, and conjecture, which is wonderful. There's a lot of knowledge to share with each other here so that you can make a more informed decision. The main purpose of what I've done here is to, at the very minimum, tell you what to expect financially. In other words, you need to manage expectations if you only have $300 budgeted all in on a new PC. On the top end of the financial spectrum, there is tremendous wiggle room, especially with graphics cards, processors, and motherboards. The point is that you have a better idea of what to expect so you don't get screwed buying components, i.e. don't spend $700 on an RTX 2070 that you know you can get for $500, or get bent over a barrel when you know you can get the same processor for $200 cheaper elsewhere. So that's about it for this segment. If you're watching this on YouTube, let her rip in the comments below with suggestions, alternative ideas, and systems you plan to build or have built. All are welcome. Toss a like if you like this segment, and subscribing, of course, would bring me great joy. If you're listening to the podcast, be sure to subscribe and share Geek Therapy Radio with anyone you think would be interested. And if you're listening on KPRC 950 AM, I'm Johnny Hemberger, you're listening to Geek Therapy Radio, and we'll be right back in just a few short minutes. Go follow Geek Therapy Radio across all social media. Just type in Geek Therapy Radio and it'll come up. Audi Central Houston and AudiCentralHouston.com. The holidays are here, and there is no better gift for yourself, let's be honest, or for others than a brand new or certified used Audi from Audi Central Houston. And like I've preached many times before, there's an Audi in every budget, from the A3 to the stunning R8. Audi Central Houston has you covered. That's AudiCentralHouston.com. WorthTheWait.co. That's WorthTheWait, WEIGHT. If you're a geek like me, and I know that you are, you might be a geek about your nutrition, but even better, maybe you haven't thought about your nutrition. That's where WorthTheWait.co comes in. We all need some help with our nutrition. No matter how much you're working out, that won't matter if you're not feeding your body what it needs to fully utilize after those workouts. So make sure you go visit my friends at worththewait.co. WorthTheWait, WEIGHT.co. Let's move on to something that I have talked about probably at this point. I mean, I'm almost 2 years into Geek Therapy Radio. It'll be 2 years in the spring, which that's amazing. But I have talked about the differences between news and commentary. I'm not getting very political here on Geek Therapy Radio. I never do, but it's something that you should take into consideration when you are browsing through your social media or reading things from any sort of whatever news outlet. It's important to understand their bias. And more importantly, it's important to differentiate between what is news, the who, what, where, and when, and the commentary, which is all the speculation on why, or not even why. It's just all the speculation and completely biased opinions they present to you as news. Rush Limbaugh, Trevor Noah, they're doing the same thing. They are in the same game. They are two sides of the same coin. Doesn't matter conservative or liberal, they are both doing the same thing, presenting sound bites out of context and then making commentary on it. There's an article that has been going around talking about how fast bots spread misinformation through social media, and it's something like the propagation of it's 30% misinformation by the time you read it, or something like that. At least it was something like that. The takeaway here is to be careful of what you're reading. And for me, a rule of thumb has always been how sensational, especially on Facebook, how sensational is what I'm reading here, starting with the headline. How sensational is it? How much is it trying to tug on the heartstrings? Because if it's either very sensational or a massive tug on the heartstrings, it's basically not worth reading into. Or at the very least, it is worth getting a second opinion on or doing further research. At the very least. The more something makes you go, oh my gosh, that's horrible, or whatever, you should look into it a bit further. I implore you to look into it a bit further, because odds are, you read through the article, it's going to be heavily biased and riddled with things that are not true. Opinion designed and presented to you as fact when it in fact is not. I'm not going to use the term fake news because that's a whole nother stupid issue in itself. Fake news, it's a buzzword. But all I'm saying is be conscious of what you're consuming and be very aware of the bias. And if it's a heavily biased piece, odds are it's riddled with misinformation. Now, I say all of that to get to this point I'm trying to make. At the beginning of the show, I was telling you, educating everybody on what those strange noises are that you hear on an aircraft. When you're going to visit family or wherever you're traveling, you hear all those bumps and thumps and noises coming out of the airplane. I explained to you exactly what those were to ease your fears and bring you understanding and knowledge, but mostly understanding of your world to put your heart at ease. And do you know how I did it? I heard passengers around me asking, once again, as they always do, what are those noises? What's that sound? And you know what? I pulled my phone out of my pocket and I looked it up. Once, after the pilot made it okay to turn on your phones again, when you're taxiing and such after you land, I said, I'm going to figure this out right now. I have access to all of human knowledge from the dawn of time to currently right this second in my pocket, and I can access it within seconds. So I typed into my phone, as nobody else was doing, because everyone forgets that they have access to all human knowledge ever. I looked up airplane noises, or sawing airplane noise, barking airplane noise, and you know what I got instantly? The answer. And the answer eased my heart, and the answer eased the hearts around me who cared to know what that information was, what those sounds were. So, with all the misinformation going around, with all the bias going around, don't forget that 99% of us, just ballparking, have a device in our pockets that can instantly access the wealth and entirety of all human knowledge up into the second you turn on that device to look up said informational facts or what figures you're looking for. You have that access in your pocket. There's no excuse to be ignorant anymore. You have it all there. Thank you for listening to Geek Therapy Radio this week. I've been Johnny Hemberger, your mental curator. Please remember to follow, like, and subscribe, all that good stuff, to Geek Therapy Radio on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and Twitter. Just type in Geek Therapy Radio and it'll come up. Subscribe to the podcast. It's Geek Therapy Radio with Johnny Hemberger. And make sure it's with Johnny Hemberger, because there's another network I'm not affiliated with, Geek Therapy Radio with Johnny Hemberger. Other than that, have a great holiday, you guys. I'll talk to you next week. One final 30 seconds for Audi Central Houston on the way out here. Audi Central Houston and AudiCentralHouston.com. The holidays are upon us, and it's time to get your Audi on at Audi Central Houston. Whether it's a certified pre-owned A3 to save you some money, all the way up to an R8, which you can also get pre-owned, save some bucks there. Audi Central Houston and AudiCentralHouston.com has you covered. Go to Audi Central Houston, tell them Geek Therapy Radio sent you, and they will treat you like family. Not because they have to, but because they want to.